Hello and welcome back to the Opposites Abroad podcast, a podcast about all things travel. Charlie Bosco here, joined as ever by TT down in Denver, and we've got a very special guest who I can see is via our video call is already laughing at me for doing my broadcaster voice. We're joined by Nicholas Sarabin, who I met in Toronto a few weeks ago and has a pretty fascinating story to tell, primarily about the 7 years that you spent in the Ukraine.
Yeah, since 2017, it's been kind of home base for the most part.
And TT, you've been to Ukraine, but quite a while ago now.
Yes, I did a trip there about 2012, 2013 for, I think, a week. I did a Poland-Ukraine trip.
And Nick, you pointed out to me today, it's actually 3 years to the day since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I was really thinking about how to deal with the situation. We're recording this on the 24th of February. It won't come out for another week or two, but I don't necessarily want to dwell on the current political situation, primarily because I'm ashamed of America's capitulation to everything Vladimir Putin wants, but also because it's an evolving situation, and even by the time this comes out, what we say could be obsolete, and the whole world is speculating about how it might end. I figured it might be more interesting to focus on your experiences on the ground in Ukraine, what you've experienced there, what it was like during the invasion, post-invasion. But just quickly, what is your take on the 3 years in? It seems like we have to ask, what is your take on the current outlook for Ukraine?
I gotta say, it's not looking great with the our lovely leader to the south.
Bear in mind, Nick is in Canada, so I assume that is a reference to His Holiness the Trump.
It would be the Tangerine Mussolini.
Be careful, TT is very sensitive about Trump. If any jokes get made about Trump, whether it's his hair, the fact he's bright orange, or the fact that he basically does whatever Putin tells him to, he's very sensitive, so just be careful if you don't mind. But sorry, go on.
So yeah, I mean, the current situation is looking a little grim, to be honest, with the support from the United States kind of up in the air, to say the least. And from the ground, I can tell you that people are tired. People are drained. I mean, the country is still pretty united, and people, they still want to win. They still want to kind of recover their homeland, recover the East, and become whole again. But a lot of people are also they just want it to be over. You know, they want their sons to come home. They want people to stop dying. So it's kind of a dark time. People are tired.
Yeah, it's been an attritional war, and I guess Putin's strategy, once it didn't go well initially, I guess, was to kind of sit in and just win the war of attrition. Is it your impression that people in Ukraine's will is weakening? That's not a criticism of them, but just an observation that after 3 years you aren't as fired up, as passionate as you might have been because you just ground down.
Ground down's a good word for it. I wouldn't say weakening. I don't think that's the right term. Because
sorry, it's not the term I wanted to use. Okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, the resolve is as strong as ever. In fact, it's probably even deeper. There's more rage, there's more anger, there's more frustration, and that frustration it lashes out in different directions now. I mean, you look at the way the United States is handling things. You look at people abroad. Like I remember this came around during New Year's, which was actually a really strange experience for me the last couple of New Year's Eves, where, Ukrainians, they all have friends abroad. They all have, the people that they met while traveling or the people that they studied with when they were studying abroad. And, people are posting their celebrations with the fireworks, talking about their dreams for the next year. And, over in Ukraine, people are dreaming of a day when they don't have to wake up to the sound of bombs, when they can feel safe, when they don't have to explain to the children why they can't go to the forest because of mines. when they can have reliable electricity for 24 hours a day. The wishes that we have are so different from the rest of the world, and there's kind of an anger that can come out towards the people that take all those things for granted nowadays.
Okay, it's but because of course it hasn't always been like that. Ukraine was in great shape not so long ago. What was it like when you went, T?
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. As I said, I did a Poland Ukraine trip. We went to Poland and then took the train into Ukraine. I spent time in Lviv, and I apologize, Nicholas, if I don't pronounce things right. And then
don't worry.
Spent the last
I'll silently
the
judge
last
you.
part the last part in Kiev. It was just fascinating, and I loved that. I apologize, I don't know what it's called, but the big statue of the woman with the sword,
Motherland Monument.
I thought that was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. I thought the food was outstanding. There's a lot of history there. One of the reasons that I like traveling is because you feel a connection to places you've traveled to, and when Russia attacked the Ukraine, regardless of what Trump said, my heart just went out, because I mean, it's a huge country. It's, I think, 40 million people, and I just couldn't believe that. I really naively thought that we were kind of past the stage of war in the world, and I never would have thought that a country would have attacked a country in Europe. It didn't seem possible to me.
Yeah, we really thought we had the war to end all wars in Europe, that ended in 1945, and yeah, I think my dad was born in 1945. I don't think he's ever imagined a world where Europe could be at war again. It's still really jarring to think of, but the country was. I mean, I'm not an expert on the history of Ukraine. The country was doing great, as I understand it, in the 2000s and onwards.
I can't speak to the early 2000s. They had the revolution in 2014, which is when the war really started. Some people in Ukraine get quite particular that they don't like that we say that the war began in 2022, because it was the full-scale invasion, is what we say. Because, Russia did invade Ukraine. They annexed Crimea, Donetsk, Lugansk back in 2014, and there's been activity on the front lines for more than a decade now. And it wasn't until 2022 that it ramped up and became kind of this international thing that everyone became aware of.
But it's funny how it's kind of smuggling through customs, the phrase annexed, and yet we all refer to it as annexed. It's a strange way of putting it, isn't it? Because they basically took over a sovereign nation's territory.
Yeah,
I mean, in 2014.
I couldn't believe when that happened that there wasn't more uproar in the world for that. I mean, even then I thought, this is ridiculous. Like, Russia's just going to take a big chunk of another country, and Europe didn't do anything about it. And I really think, not to get too political, but I think that was Putin testing to see what would happen. And I think if the world had stood up then, maybe it could have saved this from happening in the first place, but they didn't.
I really think if Obama had his time again, he'd have been a little more forceful on that. I think, looking back, it looked like he maybe rolled over a little bit too easily.
Yeah, it was a big.
I mean,
a big letdown, let's say.
It's not the United States' problem, but the reaction from the Western powers was pretty lukewarm, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that should have been they should have emergency been trying to get Ukraine in NATO.
Yeah. So, God, it's quite heavy stuff. This sometimes.
So sorry, I've got opinions.
No, it's great. It's great. You know what they say about opinions? They're like backsides. Everyone's got one. No, I'm only kidding. No, we're here to express opinions. I think it's great, but it's you and I have had quite a few light-hearted podcasts. And Yeah, it's
well, mostly
heavy.
you. I'm pretty serious.
You are a very
I get that
very
impression.
serious individual.
So I have a quick Ukraine story on how I knew that Ukraine was not going to roll over and get defeated in a day.
Go on,
So
then.
when I went to the Ukraine, the first night we asked like at the hotel where was a good bar to go to, and what they said was go to this alley and say the secret word and at this door.
Oh, is this in Lviv?
So
I know
yes.
the place you're talking about.
Odysseus. So we went in there, and it was an underground bunker. It was made to look like a World War II Ukrainian
Like
bunker.
you're in a
or
trench,
is that,
basically.
yeah. And there's a shooting gallery off to the side where you shoot like pellet rifles at pictures of Lenin. And at least when I was there was. So we're drinking, and the waitresses and stuff are dressed in like little military uniforms and stuff, and it looks like you're in an underground bunker in World War II. Well, we're sitting at a table, and the Ukrainians are like super nice, and they actually could not believe we were American. I went with a buddy, and the doorman, when I said the secret code, was like, "Where are you from?" And he went through like a million different places before he came to America, and he was so shocked. It's just not probably at that time, it just wasn't a place Americans really went on vacation. So we're sitting at a table, and it's my buddy and I, and we're drinking beer, and everyone's singing and chanting, and it's just big to do. And so they start chanting and singing the song, and they're chanting the same thing over and over and over and banging on the tables. And I'm singing, I'm like chanting it too. I don't even know what it means, but I'm chanting because I've been drinking. And I turned to this Ukrainian guy next to me that I just met, and I said, "What are we chanting?" And he goes, "Kill all Russians." and I was so shocked because everyone seems so happy. And I remember that when Russia attacked Ukraine, I thought, man, they are not going to roll over. There's no way. And I just remember that moment at the bar when they were chanting that.
Yeah, but that is two tough nations. Like if you think about the hardest guy in Russia, in fact the hardest guy in the average village in Russia could probably win the UFC. They're tough people. Like
yeah,
it's a clash of two tough nations.
Just on a lighter note, when you left that restaurant, did you go out the back? Did you go out a different way than you came in? Did you see a giant metal Tyrannosaurus Rex?
No.
No? Okay. That must have been a later
I remember
edition.
I went upstairs. I still have that target I shot of Lenin.
Oh, yeah. It's a good thing to hold on
because
to.
I took it with me.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know where it is, but I know I have it somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know the name of that place, but it's quite famous. And yeah, on the way out, they have a special corridor for you to go through, and someone just built a giant tin metal transformer Tyrannosaurus Rex. Just completely for the fuck of it, I guess. It's so opposite of what the experience you just had was. So surreal. Yeah.
So, Nick, let's go back to the start. You grew up in rural Alberta, pretty close to Edmonton. Now, we try to be a family-friendly podcast, so I'm going to ask you to just quickly describe Edmonton in terms that are radio-friendly. Tricky.
That is going to be tough.
Fair disclosure, I've been to West Edmonton Mall and I've been to the airport, so I've never been. It might be
so
great.
You've seen the highlights. The rundown mall and the place that gets you out of there. Where else would you want to go?
Yeah, well, when we met in Toronto, you were not. You amused me most of the week with your descriptions of Edmonton. So just tell me a little bit about where you grew up and how on earth.
Can you edit this? Can you just add in the beeps to cover me?
I bought a beep machine recently, so I just push this big red button every time someone drops an F-bomb.
All right. Well, I'm gonna let at least one go. I'm gonna say Edmonton is a shithole. Edmonton, it's like they call it a city, but it's not. It's a big fat town that they call a city. It's basically, imagine like any prairie random town that just has no life, no culture. It's just a loose collection of suburban houses, and then just multiply that by about 100. Just increase the population to 750,000 people, and then you add a downtown core. You add like 12 blocks of towers that are just deserted. There's just nothing. The streets are empty. There's nobody there. The businesses are empty. The offices are empty. It's a ghost town in the downtown. It's cold. It's frozen. No, I'm not done. I'm just getting started here.
Oh, sorry. I thought you would. Okay, I thought
you've got a solid
done.
2 avenues. There's Jasper Ave, which is where all the drug addicts hang out, and there's White Ave, which is where all the drug addicts sleep. There's the only people you run into on the streets, just drug addicts, almost exclusively. Everyone else drives a big pickup truck from east to west. And then there's the mall, which at one point was a big fancy place, and now it's just run down and old looking.
It was the biggest mall in the world, wasn't it?
I believe, one time. It was our claim to fame, other than it was West Edmonton Mall and Wayne Gretzky. So the two things that we had going for us.
Now I want to go.
I know.
That makes me want to go.
How did the application go for that job at the Edmonton Tourism Office, by the way? I meant to ask you about that.
I didn't get a call back.
You didn't get a call
shocking.
back? Okay. The poor people of Edmonton. Yeah, I was about to say I know some people from Edmonton. None of them still live there. You know what? Maybe it's great. I feel like there's a bit of a recurring theme whenever I meet people from Edmonton, and they kind of echo your opinion of it, but I'm desperately trying not to judge until I've been there myself.
The only people who like Edmonton are the people who haven't left Edmonton. Like, they don't know what a city is.
Yeah, well, I remember when we were in Toronto, and I said, "What's Edmonton like?" And you said, "It's a smaller, colder, and shitter version of this."
Yeah.
I don't know if you
Sums
remember
it up
that.
pretty
But
well.
I thought it was a good line.
So we should meet up in Edmonton and do a show in Edmonton.
Let's go to Edmonton in like January.
Great timing, gentlemen. Great timing.
Yeah. Okay, so from rural Alberta,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like it was a real tear to leave, but you managed. How did life lead you to Ukraine?
It's a question I get asked a lot by Ukrainians. I've had to practice this answer because Ukrainians, as patriotic as they are, and as they paradoxically love their country and despise their country at the same time, and they have no comprehension of why someone would leave Canada to go live in Ukraine, which is a whole other thing. The way that they look at Canada as this fairy tale fantasy land where everyone's rich and there's no problems and life is just butterflies and rainbows all the time.
Yeah, but in their defense, life is pretty good here. Most people, not everybody, but most people live in a house with heating.
That's true.
And internet and warm water, and compared to how most humans have lived since evolution.
Don't get me wrong.
Pretty good.
Canada's a nice place. Canada's an easy place to live. It's easy living up here. But it's got its downsides.
It definitely does have its downsides.
But the answer I always give when people ask me why Ukraine is like, I didn't actually choose Ukraine, but Ukraine chose me. I think I was 21, something like that. Going nowhere in life, just kind of floating from one dead-end job to the other. Didn't have much purpose or direction. And I remember I was sitting at work one day in some random shop, and I was just sitting on my laptop, no customers. I saw a picture of the Cinque Terre in Italy, the Amalfi Coast. And I was like, damn, I would like to go there. And that was the first moment I thought, like, wait, I can actually travel. As a Canadian, it's not as obvious. Like, I imagine as a Brit growing up, Europe's right there. Like, the opportunity to travel it seems obvious. But for me, it never really crossed my mind. It seemed like such a barrier that just wasn't possible, that I never considered it.
Yeah, I think it's a different culture in Europe. I mean, you go on school trips to France, especially in the latest generation where EasyJet and Ryanair have meant that even people without huge incomes can travel. It might not be super adventurous travel, but you can go to Spain and you can go to Greece, and Yeah, it is. It's a different mindset, and living in Canada, it's a bloody long way to anything that isn't really like Canada.
Yeah.
So I do get it, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, the average Canadian, their idea of travel is going to an all-inclusive resort in Mexico once a year. So I got obsessed with this idea of travel from that one single picture of inspiration. And originally I planned the backpacking journey through Western Europe. I had a whole list of, I was going to fly to UK. I was going to do London and Bath and then go to the Netherlands and then go down to France. The classic Western European backpacking hostel journey. But it never worked out. I kept saving money, and then, I would lose my job, or the economy was down, I got laid off, this and that. That happened for like a year, and I became more and more obsessed with the idea of traveling, partially because I wanted to go places, partially I just wanted to get away from Canada. I just kind of hated where I was. And I eventually hit a point where I was it was middle of winter. I had lost my job at the restaurant. I was applying for job after job after job. I was banging my head against the wall, like I gotta make this happen. I gotta get out of here. I gotta go somewhere. And I signed up for a volunteering website. It's called Workaway. It's like a voluntourism kind of thing, which has its problems, to be sure. But at the time, I just wanted a way to get out of the country. And I went online. I made a profile. I uploaded a picture, put a description, listed all the places I was interested in going. And I just kind of let that sit there. I didn't really reach out to anyone. I didn't think I had enough money to go traveling. I didn't have a lot saved. But I just wanted to take that step for myself. And after a couple weeks, it was a really weird day in my life, actually. It was a real fork in the road kind of moment of my life. Because I had been sitting at home unemployed for about 3 months, no opportunities, sending out applications every day to every single kind of work that I could get. And nothing. I heard no callbacks, no interviews, no job offers. And then someday in early February, I got a great job offer. It was for a cook, which is what I was doing at that time. It was good money, good hours, good training opportunities, like kind of a dream job for me at the time. And then about 15 minutes later, I got an email from this volunteering website, and it was a woman in Ukraine. She said, "Hey, we run a small English school in a village outside the capital, and we'd like you to come stay with us and teach English for 4 weeks." So we set that up, and originally, I was going to take the job. I didn't think I had enough money. I was going to turn them down, but I'll give you 2 guesses as to which direction I went in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. But look, when you're that age, money doesn't really factor in, does it? I mean, what an adventure.
That was pretty much it. I was sitting there smoking a joint with my dad, I think. And I was like, you know what, Dad? I think I got to save more money. I should take the job. And he's like, you've been talking about nothing but travel for the past year and a half. And here's your chance to go someplace interesting. Not just fuck off to London or Paris for a few weeks. But this is somewhere not a lot of people go. And it's all you've been talking about. So why would you not take this opportunity? So he kind of gave me a good shake. And I took that opportunity. And I remember I had a little going away party. I was supposed to, the original plan, I was going to volunteer for 4 weeks in Ukraine. And then I was going to go blow my money backpacking in Eastern Europe. And I figured I had about 2 or 3 weeks worth of cash before I'd have to fly home. And then I ended up not coming home for 11 months.
Wow. What happened then? You did your 4 weeks, then what?
Well, I extended it up to 3 months. So I capped out my 90 days. And then through the same volunteering website, I found a lot of other opportunities in Western Europe. So I worked at a hostel in Poland. I ended up being an au pair in Switzerland and had a lot of crazy adventures in Switzerland, just hanging out with this family, making sure the kids don't kill themselves while we go climb mountains and shit. And then I would be out of Ukraine for 3 months and then bounce back. I went back to the same house, the same village, and just kind of jumped back and forth from all these different volunteering opportunities, and then eventually ran out of money after about a year.
Was the village south or north?
It was southeast, so it was it was across the river. But I don't know, 45 minutes from Kiev, maybe an hour top.
Because my understanding with Ukraine is that the further south you get, the more, I don't know how to word this, anti-Russia they are, or is that...
It's more east-west.
Oh, east-west.
Because if you're out in Lviv in the west, or you're in the Carpathian Mountains, it's very Ukrainianized. People speak very
I'm getting my
clean
directions
Ukrainian.
mixed up then. So west and east.
That's okay. Yeah. So yeah, in Western Ukraine, they speak a very clean Ukrainian, and you'll often hear jealousy from people in Central or Eastern Ukraine, where their Ukrainian is a little bit more bastardized. It's not really their first language. Russian is more their first language, but everybody really appreciates someone who speaks nice Ukrainian, and that's usually out west that you find that.
Okay. Do you speak Ukrainian?
I speak something called Surjik. Very poorly, I might add. Embarrassingly poor for someone who lived there for 7 years. But that's kind of the luxury of being a native English speaker, is that you don't learn the language.
Yeah.
You don't need to. Especially as a professional English teacher, like part of my training is to communicate with people who don't know English, which just made me more lazy about it.
Yeah. Well, English is the greatest language ever. Especially
no, actually, you know what? Actually not.
Especially
as
American
a professional
English.
teacher. As a professional English teacher, I can say that English is a garbage language. It's
a mess.
It's a mess.
But you've heard the joke, right? You've heard the joke that if you trilingual, you speak 3 languages. If you're bilingual, you speak 2. And if you speak 1 language, then you're English.
That's a good one.
And it's so true.
It is, yeah. So Surjik is like it's like Spanglish. It's like a mix of Ukrainian and Russian, which is what I learned because when I was in the village, most people spoke Russian, so I started to learn Russian, and then at some point I just liked Ukrainian more, so I started learning a little bit of Ukrainian, and then like all my friends spoke Russian, so I went back to Russian, and then the war started, and the language thing is a big, complicated, messy issue in Ukraine that we can get into, but as a foreigner, it's pretty clear cut. For locals, it's more complicated. You know, what is their mother tongue? What language did they grow up speaking with their family? What language does their mom speak? But for me, as a guest in the country, when the war started, it's pretty obvious that you don't speak Russian.
Yeah.
When you're there, that's
no. For someone that's English speaking, does Ukrainian sound more like Polish or does it sound like Russian or?
You know, people say that they're very similar, but I've never found that to be true. I think Ukrainian is quite a bit different sounding. And you'll find that people who speak Ukrainian can pick up Russian quite easily, but the opposite is not necessarily true.
Okay.
So like Western Ukrainians who maybe don't know Russian as well, they can understand someone from Moscow, but someone from Moscow cannot pick up Ukrainian. It goes one way, but not really the other. I don't know why, but that's my experience.
So you said you made out it's a bit of a long story. Give us a bit of a background on language in Ukraine, because this is an interesting element of it. I guess it's what Putin and nationalist Russians have played on, which is obviously their claim is that Ukraine is essentially Russia.
Yeah.
This
one drives me wild.
Yeah, I don't think many people even know that in the United States know that Ukrainian is its own language.
Yeah.
I think they have no clue.
This one, it's a very common misconception about Ukraine that people have, and people repeat it without realizing that they're parroting Russian propaganda. Because Ukrainian, like the language thing is complicated. There's a lot to it. But what you'll hear from people online is that Russia was just going in to defend the Russian speakers and Russian people were discriminated against. I can confidently tell you in 7 or 8 years of living in Ukraine that no Russian speaker was ever discriminated against. In fact, the majority of people I know in central Ukraine, in Kiev, spoke Russian.
So we're talking day to day here, or... So if you go in a bar in Ukraine, pre-invasion in Kyiv, what are they speaking?
You'll hear a mix, complete mix. You'll have people where you'll have a conversation between 2 people, one person speaking Russian, the other one speaking Ukrainian. But what I find is the average person I interact with just spoke Russian. Unless it was a service industry job, they kind of instituted some rules that promoted the Ukrainian language. So they should start a server, a waitress, a waiter. They should start a conversation in Ukrainian and only switch to Russian if the customer is using Russian. Then they can go back. But essentially, Ukraine is a bilingual country, and the massive majority of people speak both languages. It's not like Canada. In Canada, we're a fake bilingual country where we officially have English and French, but only like 10 or 15% of Canadians actually speak French. I'm from the part of Canada that doesn't like the French, so I don't speak a lick of French. I did my mandatory 3 years in primary school and then proceeded to immediately forget everything that I learned. But in Ukraine, they're actually bilingual. So it is geography based. So the closer you get to Russia, the more eastern you get people who predominantly speak Russian. And if you're in Donetsk or Lugansk, they probably have a hard time understanding Ukrainian. And if you go all the way to the Carpathian Mountains in the west, you're going to have people that are fluent in Ukrainian and they don't speak much Russian. But the majority of the country is going to be able to speak both. They're definitely going to have a preference on which one is their mother tongue, which one do they speak with family members, but they can use both. Yeah.
So if you watch a political debate for the presidency of Ukraine, they're speaking Ukrainian.
Well, nowadays, certainly. I don't know if you went back like 20 years. I'm not sure. But generally, all government business is Ukrainian now. So officially, it's 100% a Ukrainian country. And you'll find like all the movies in the cinema are dubbed into Ukrainian. I see the book thing was tricky. I don't remember exactly when, but sometime they shifted to more Ukrainian books and newspapers. So there used to be more access to Russian literature and Russian newspapers and things like that. But that's definitely shifted in the time that I was there to being more Ukrainian.
Pardon my ignorance. So they use the same written characters.
Cyrillic, is that the
Cyrillic. Yes, it's slightly different. Some of the letters are very 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 minorly different. But for the most part, it's the same alphabet.
Okay.
So
go on.
What and I'm going to change the subject a little bit. One of the things that I really don't understand from this whole thing, and maybe you, Nicholas, you can explain it a little bit better to us. With 40 million people in Ukraine that are very proud of being Ukrainian, a lot, especially in parts of Ukraine that really don't like the Russians. How in the world there's two things when you basically conquer a country. There's conquering the country and there's holding the country. Those are the two things. How in the world could Russia hold the Ukraine?
I don't think they could. Someone asked me this 3 years ago when the war started. Some newspaper in St. Albert wanted to interview me, and they asked me the same question. My answer was, I have no fucking clue. Because a lot of people, when the war started, a lot of people were comparing it to Afghanistan. They thought Ukraine was going to fold in 3 days. And I knew from the very beginning, like, this is going to drag out because Ukrainians are tough bastards. And there is some real patriotism in that country. You go to Ukraine, fucking everything is painted blue and yellow. The fucking roofs, the fucking handrails, guardrails, everything. Blue and yellow. All over the place. They love their country. They also hate their country, don't get me wrong. It's weird.
As an American, I can understand that right now.
Yeah, I guess so. So the idea that if Zelensky was assassinated and Russia rolled over the military, they installed a puppet, it would just be bloody. It would not be clean. Because they do despise Russia. And the weird thing is, if you go back prior to 2014, the relationship was fairly positive. The majority of people were perfectly fine with Russians. They had a lot of family or friends in Russia. There was a lot of people going back and forth between for work and things like that. So it wasn't until Russia started invading and killing and raping that they actually started to hate the Russians.
There's an interesting thing that I was reading that an economist wrote recently, saying that Russia's really in this bad position because their economy is so based on the war that they can't win or lose the war. Because if they win the war, they can't afford to rebuild Ukraine. And if they lose the war, then the government's likely to be overthrown. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think that's an accurate thought?
I mean, I can't speak to the political situation in Russia. I mean, I watch YouTube videos, I read the news as much as the next guy, but I don't have an insight into what Putin's thinking as much as anybody else.
I mean, one of the most insightful things I heard was from David Petraeus, a 3-star US general who was, I think, head of operations in Iraq, potentially Afghanistan. I might be mistaking his resume, but very high-profile general, particularly in the Obama years. And he said the lesson that America learned from Afghanistan is you can't hold a country that doesn't want to be held. You can conquer a country, you can take it over, and you can raise your flag, but you ultimately cannot control a population that doesn't want to be controlled. And I think the British found that in Northern Ireland. I think the coalition found that in Afghanistan, and I think that's probably true in Ukraine. Is had Russia marched straight through Kyiv, you just can't hold on to a country that doesn't want to be held on to.
Yeah. I mean, you could see it at the beginning of the war, before the military got organized and started receiving weapons. It was average citizens building barricades and throwing Molotov cocktails at Russians. And, I'm an English teacher and I work with a lot of teenagers. I knew 17-year-old boys and girls who were wiring netting to cover military vehicles and things like that. I knew I taught IT workers, and they were just writing DDoS scripts to attack. So like everybody was involved at the beginning. Now the military has taken over and people are in Ukraine are mostly just living their lives. But as far as Russia, the best insight I can give to how a lot of Ukrainians think, I can't speak for everyone, and I want you to take everything I say about how Ukrainians think with a grain of salt, because there are conflicting opinions, and I'm just one fucking guy who lived there, so I can't speak to everybody. But a good example I can give is are you familiar with the Wagner Group? The Wagner mercenaries.
Yes. Yeah, they almost assassinated Putin, didn't they?
Well,
exactly. So that
Prigozhin's
day,
group.
that was a big day in Ukraine. I remember it was a Saturday. I had a speaking club, and I had a whole plan, but the only thing anybody talked about for the whole hour and a half was this news. And after my class was over, I walked the streets. I went to a cafe. Everyone in Kyiv was glued to their phone that day, with a smile on their face, watching Russia just kind of tear itself apart. Everyone was excited. But I talked to a good friend of mine about this, and she said she doesn't care. Because at the end of the day, it's not about Russia. Like, what Russia does, what they don't do, the state of their economy, who's in charge, who's making the decisions, none of that matters. All that matters is Ukraine, and what kind of state Ukraine is in. So there's no emphasis on how weak is the enemy. Are they going to crumble? Is their economy going to fall apart? The focus is on Ukraine. How do we make our economy strong? How do we be resilient? How do we get through this? How do we survive?
Well, and Yuri Prigozhin, who was the head of the Wagner Group, made one of the biggest miscalculations of his life by just not overthrowing Putin.
Yeah,
and
his
a month or two later died in a mysterious plane crash. It was
lots of people seem to fall out of windows in Russia.
Yeah, well, having got in trouble once for illegally filming in Red Square, it was scary. It's a really scary place, and this was 2019, 18, a while ago. It was scary then, so I dread to think what it's like now. But anyway, so you end up back in Ukraine longer term. What was Ukraine like in that period between when you started to essentially make it home and the start of the war. Was there a feeling that the war was coming? Tell us about that period.
Yeah, so Ukraine, I describe it as a diamond in the rough. It's a wonderful place. Kiev's an amazing city. It's one of the best cities I've ever been to. And the city is fascinating. TT mentioned the food recently, and it's funny. I recently asked some Ukrainian friends in Toronto if they could bring one thing from Ukraine to Canada. And this is a question I ask a lot, and the answer is always the same. It's puzata hata, which is a chain restaurant. It's canteen style. So you show up, you grab a tray.
Oh, I think I went to there
like a high school tray.
Yeah, I think I went to that in Kiev.
Yeah, you haven't been to Ukraine if you haven't gone to puzata hata. So it's canteen style. You grab a tray, you go down a line, and you take what you want. So they've got soups and salads. It's all Ukrainian food. It's very fast. It's very cheap, and it's super tasty. So I don't know why I started talking about food. I just haven't had dinner yet. But yeah, puzata hata is a big thing. Everybody loves puzata hata. But yeah, I made Ukraine my home, and I love it. It's culturally, it's an amazing place. The people are amazing. They taught me a lot about working hard, about taking care of yourself, because it's a place, here in Canada, there's a lot of safety nets. There's a lot of things to fall back on if you fuck up your life. Ukraine, no such thing exists. So you really learn to look out for yourself. And I had a lot of respect for people who made it in Ukraine, because I saw teenagers there. I had just finished being a teenager. I was like 22 at the time. And I realized how lazy I was. And then I come in and I see these Ukrainian kids who work their ass off from like sun up to sundown. They're taking extra lessons, private classes, they're seeing tutors, they're going to sports camp. They're doing everything they can to get into a foreign university, because they know that's like the key to building a good life for themselves. And at the same time, they know that their teachers are abusive. And they know that their schools are falling apart, and they know that their textbooks are outdated, but they have to keep pushing anyway. They don't let it get to them. So the people are wonderful. Cities are beautiful. Nature's amazing. I can't say enough good things about Ukraine. And,
but why are people trying to get out in that case? Is it because the lack of opportunity?
It's the lack of opportunity. It's the general low cost of living, but that's more of a positive. It's just lack of opportunity. The economy does struggle. It is the poorest country in Europe, statistically, I think.
Oh, I thought it was like Moldova.
It might be, but Ukraine's like top 3, bottom 3, I guess I would say. So economically, it's difficult, and economically, like, the money is tight for most people. And, of course, I lived in the capital for the majority of time, which is naturally going to be the richest part of the country. But if you go out to the villages, the poverty is shocking. You got a lot of places that don't have running water. They have unreliable electricity. But it also comes out in kind of beautiful ways. You see people who become very self-sufficient. In Ukraine, nobody has lawns. Lawn is a foreign concept to them. They have gardens where they grow food year-round. And you want some sour cream, or you want some milk, you go to the local village farmer and you buy milk, and you pet the cow that you get the milk from. You give it a few pats.
Yeah, it's a different way. I remember being in rural Romania.
Yeah.
And thinking, oh my God, we're in the European Union.
Yeah.
It was like going back 50 years.
Yeah.
So what was the build up to war like? You were in Kyiv.
Yeah.
When did people start thinking Russia might invade us? Because it
was a really weird time.
Even a month or two before, from the outside, it was so unthinkable that it could happen. What was it like on the ground?
People thought the same. It was also unthinkable. But also we had been gaslit. So the thing that not a lot of people remember is that in previous years, I can't remember if it was the previous year or if it was 2021 or 2020, Russia had built up troops on the border. They had done that before. So they do this build up. They get everybody ready. They put 20,000, 30,000 troops on the border. They look like they're going to war. And everybody gets real tense. And then it dies out. And that's what everyone kind of thought at the beginning in December. In November, December, even early January. People thought, it's whatever. It's not a big deal. I mean, I remember reading the international headlines about the buildup of Russian troops and camps and tents and things like that. And I was like, whatever. They did this before. They do this every couple of years. But over time, it started to get more serious. You started to notice little things. I mean, on one hand, nobody ever thought anything would happen. Even February 21st, 2022, you ask the majority of people, I think most people would say, it's going to roll, it's going to blow over. Nothing bad's going to happen. But you did start to notice things. You'd be living your life regular as ever, but then you'd see someone at the supermarket buying a whole lot of canned goods. Or you'd see a guy at the gas station filling up a bunch of jerry cans with gas. So you'd see these kind of oddities kind of pop up more and more as time went on. And the Canadian Embassy started to warn me because I was registered as a citizen abroad living in Ukraine. And I started getting these increasingly more alarming emails from the embassy. They went from informative to informative in red text to informative in red text with all capital letters.
And what are they saying? Get out?
Just like, we can't guarantee your safety. You should probably leave. You should probably leave. And then I remember, because I wasn't there when the war started. I left about 2 or 3 days before, which was kind of a crazy story, actually. But it was a Friday, I remember. It was one of the craziest weekends of my life. It was a Friday night. I had finished my teaching. I had gone to the supermarket and came back. I called my parents, and I remember my parents and my grandparents were visiting each other, and my grandparents were freaking out, and they were asking me, like, is everything okay? And I was like, it's fine. Everything's okay. Life is normal. Nothing's going to happen. Don't worry about it. I'm safe. And I got home. I put my groceries away. I was supposed to go meet a friend for drinks. And I just pulled up Facebook, and I was in one of the expat Facebook groups. And some guy was asking, like, did anyone else get a phone call from the American Embassy? And I checked, the Telegram groups and the Facebook groups, and it was this very sudden thing that the American Embassy was saying people need to leave within 48 hours. And it suddenly felt very, very real. Because it wasn't a warning anymore. It wasn't a maybe anymore. It was we have intelligence that says you need to get out of this country within 48 hours. And at that point, when you decide to go, which is a difficult decision outright, but at the time I thought, okay, you know what? I'll go. I'll go for 2 weeks. I'll go visit my family. I'll come back. Things will blow over. I'll come back. But you suddenly have to make crazy decisions. Like, you start looking at planes online. Everybody's booking up tickets every second. And are you gonna give yourself 48 hours to get your affairs in order, to pack and to say goodbye to friends and get your shit together? Or do you need to pick the flight that's in 8 hours? So I ended up booking the flight that was kind of at the end of the weekend. And I canceled drinks with my friend. And I tried to get everything in order. And that was a crazy weekend. I bought the most expensive plane ticket of my life. I think it was $4,000. And it had like 6 layovers. Because it was so last minute. It was, I got to go all the way to Edmonton, Canada. I tried asking some people in Europe, like, if they could put me up, but no one was available at the time. It wasn't really working out. So going back to home was my only option. So I had like a crazy set of layovers. And then I had to go sign some documents at work. I had to say goodbye to some friends. I was kind of crushing on a girl that I was seeing, and kind of confessed those feelings to her, being like, I can't leave this country without telling this girl how I feel. So I did that.
How'd that go?
It's a long story. won't get into that.
Yeah, there's some beautiful
she's
women.
She's married now.
There's some beautiful women in Ukraine.
Absolutely. Anyway, this girl I'm talking about, though, she's married now. She's married to somebody else. So, like, I did that whole thing. It was also the time of COVID. COVID was still kicking around at that time. You still needed a COVID test to get on a plane. So, I was packing up my whole life. I had no idea when I was going to come back. I assumed it was going to be like 2 weeks. So I was, saying goodbye to friends. I was trying to meet everybody. I was trying to pack up my stuff. And I got my COVID test. And then, I got back, like, I think my plane was on Monday morning or something like that. And I got back Sunday night. And I opened my Gmail. And it said that I had COVID. And I wasn't going to get on a plane. I was like, oh, fuck. Well, I guess I'm stuck.
This was you were in Kiev. You hadn't even got started.
Yeah. So I was in Kiev. I was in my apartment. And I spent, $4,000 on a plane ticket, which I couldn't afford. And non-refundable plane ticket. And I think I called my parents and I said, because they were panicking, and I was like, well, I'm stuck. I'm going to bed. I'm tired. I had a long weekend. I was exhausted. But I also texted a friend of mine, Lisa, who she's Ukrainian, but she was living in Canada. And, at the time I was dealing with a lot of messages because everyone was worried. This is a consistent theme you'll find from pre-war to war to these days. The people that are outside of Ukraine are freaking out way more than the people inside Ukraine. Way more. It's one of the reasons it's easier to be in Ukraine than be outside of Ukraine, because, when you hear the bombs, when you see the damage with your own eyes, it's weirdly easier to rationalize than when you're abroad. Just, you have no idea what's going on. You're freaking out. So I told my parents I went to bed. I text my friend Lisa, and she's into biology and chemistry, and she's like, okay, you're gonna go get another test, and I'm gonna tell you how to cheat the test. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I'm fucking tired. It's not gonna work. It's gonna be a waste of money. But I thought, okay, if I get blown up a week from now, I'm gonna really regret that I didn't put everything I could into getting out of this country. So the next morning, I woke up at like 6 a.m. I went to a pharmacy. I bought this water nasal spray, and I got the rapid COVID test, and I sprayed the shit out of my nose before taking the test. Just absolutely destroyed my nose. And I took the test, and I thought, well, it's not going to work, but at least I did it. Because I remember I had been in contact with someone who I knew had COVID. So I figured I had it. I went back to my hotel. I pulled out my phone, and it said, you're clean. I got the results. It said, you can go. I got my test. And at that point, I had about 25 minutes to pack before I had to get in an Uber in order to make my plane. And I had not packed anything. So I was looking around my apartment like, I don't know when I'm going to be back. I got dirty dishes in the sink. I got cheese in the fridge. And I got to be out here in 25 minutes. What do I take? What do I leave? Which was a very interesting 25 minutes. And it's something I reflect on quite often, of the decisions I made in those moments. And I think about that all the time now, of if I had to leave this place in 25 minutes, what are the important things to me? What actually matters and what doesn't?
Yeah, and just to divert slightly, where we live in BC, we got evacuated for fires.
Yeah.
And a good portion of our neighbourhood burned down, and we had a pretty similar situation. And I basically realised we actually keep physical photo albums here, so we, aside from the humans, we got the physical photo albums. And actually driving away from our house as fire curled over the hill, I realised that everything I actually cared about wasn't just in the car; it was in the seats of the car, and that if everything else burned down, including my photo albums, then it really didn't matter.
Yeah.
And it's quite a cleansing experience to feel that.
I had the opposite experience where I took the most meaningless, useless shit, and then for the next 3 months, I kept thinking, "Oh, this thing that's really important to me, or this like very sentimental object I left behind, or it didn't cross my mind at the time."
Did you take the cheese?
I left the cheese. My friend owed me some money, and I said, "Go to my apartment and do the dishes and clear out the fridge, and we're even." That was my solution.
So you didn't have Stilton when you got home?
I think I did eventually, because I didn't come back to Ukraine for about 6 months. I ended up in Bulgaria for 6 months, and then a friend of mine and we both went back at the same time. And I'll never forget that moment of walking into my apartment, because I didn't know. I remember seeing pictures in the first week that when Russia was actually in Kyiv, and people were posting pictures, and I saw like Russian tanks are over here, and down here, oh look, that's my apartment building. So I don't know if there are like bullet holes in my windows, or if the office got blown up. I have no idea. So 6 months I was wondering, is all my shit there? Did someone break in and steal it? Did the windows get blown out? Like, no idea what happened to my life for 6 months.
So what had happened when you got back?
Absolutely nothing. It was exactly how I left it. Just shit strewn all over the floor. Bed unmade. Air was musky, to say the least.
Why'd you go back?
Because I had to. Like, I just emotionally, like, I'm not a spiritual person, but like spiritually, like for my soul, it was something I needed to do. Because, like I didn't get to it earlier, but I was not particularly happy in Canada when I was a teenager and a young man. And Ukraine was kind of the first place I was ever really happy with myself and with my life. And it's a very special thing. I mean, Charlie, you have some experience with this where, you choose to move to a new place and you adopt a new home and you kind of build something from scratch, and in a way that makes it more meaningful. Because when I moved to Ukraine, I had nothing. I had a few friends and I had a job. I had a few coworkers that I already knew. Beyond that, I had nothing. And I built a life from nothing, and it was a life that I really loved. And when the war started, I lost all that. I lost a career that I loved. I lost a job that was really good. I was really, really happy with my work and my job. I had a great social life. I was healthy. I was fit. I knew how life worked. I was happy. I could sit here and list a million things, but I was happy in Ukraine. And I learned a lot of important life lessons. Like the man I am today, I owe to Ukraine. And it was all gone like that. The blink of an eye, it was all stolen from me. And that was an overwhelming experience, to be sitting in Canada when the war started and realize everything is gone and everyone I care about is in danger. And after 6 months of being away, I just decided I need to experience this. I need to live through it. I need to hear the bombs. I need to see the soldiers on the streets. I need to experience the shit. And it's hard for me to even explain now, years later, why, but it was necessary. It had to happen. It wasn't a choice. It was just, this is going to happen.
Yeah, I get that. These are my people, and if they go down, I'm going down with them, and if they win, then I'm winning with them. I understand that.
Do you have any friends that went into the Ukrainian army?
Yeah, I do. I have a bunch of students actually that joined the military. It's interesting though. I'll give you one story of a guy I know quite well. And this is like the previous year. So when the war started, they had a huge wave of volunteers, like more volunteers than they knew what to do with. So they turned a lot of people away. They said, like, support your country in another way. Go do your job and pay taxes. Go go be a reporter, go be a journalist, go do something, because we can't train you all. We don't have enough people. But now there's a draft. The draft age was 27, but they lowered it to 25, which is quite old in the grand scheme of things for a draft. But they do have a mandatory draft, and they do kind of pop up and detain people if you are a man. I know a lot of men who are hiding in their apartments and they don't like to go out because they're scared of being drafted. It was a very common point of discussion amongst men in Ukraine of how to avoid the draft, or, you know, I heard they raided the shopping mall last week, or I heard that, you know, people are taking university tests because if you're in university you can't be drafted. So a lot of men are going back to university, but the military are waiting outside the entrance exams trying to catch people. I had an experience with this even. I was walking home from work one day and I went into the Produkti, which is like a little convenience store. And I bought some crap for dinner. And as I was coming out, a bunch of guys with AK-47s and military and police uniforms just jump out of a van, and they all kind of surround me and they ask me for my documents. And earlier I said I speak Surjik, which is like that mix of Ukrainian Russian. I can have very basic conversations with people, but at this time I was like, not even going to attempt communication in Ukrainian or Russian. Like, I am Canadian, I speak English, here is my document. It was a scary experience, but I knew that they couldn't put me in the military. So even as scary as it was, I knew nothing bad could happen. But I can't imagine what that would be like for a man of my age to be forcefully drafted. Which, like, I get. It's a weird paradox, again, where I think everyone understands the necessity for it, but everyone's also terrified of it at the same time. I lost track of what the question was. There was a question there at some point, but I got sidetracked.
No, it's asking about whether people you knew had ended up in the military. I mean...
Yeah. So where I was going with that is the majority of people I know are always talking about how to avoid the military these days, how to avoid the draft. Partially because people don't like how the military is handling things. There's a lot of criticism towards the military these days. For example, I was teaching a doctor, and he was telling me, I don't know how true this is anecdotal, but, you know, he's a doctor, you know, works in a hospital. And he was telling me that if he got drafted, they wouldn't take advantage of his skills as a doctor. He would not be a medic. He would be given a rifle and put on the front lines because it's just disorganized, and they don't take that kind of thing into account. But I did know a guy last summer who was volunteering. He kind of signed up to go to the war. He was a journalist. He was doing a lot of projects for Ukraine. I believe there's a website like literally just called War in Ukraine, doing this kind of online magazine. And he was signing up for the military, and he was telling me that for the past 6 months he was reporting, he was interviewing soldiers, and he felt this tension inside of him. He felt this kind of upset feeling that he couldn't really describe. And he decided that he needed to fight for his country. And weirdly enough, he said that when he made the decision and signed up, that he felt a sense of relief. That he didn't have to hide from the draft anymore. He didn't have to avoid it. He was happier knowing that he was in it, and he was going to fight for the victory.
So, what is the feeling amongst people when you went back after 6 months? I mean, it sounds ridiculous. You're living in a war zone, but I guess by that stage, it's kind of calmed down.
Yeah,
it's not shock. It's not the shock and awe of the initial invasion. It's clear that Russia isn't going to just walk into Ukraine and take it for itself. What was it like when you went back? What are people like?
It was. I've mentioned a lot of paradoxes throughout this podcast. The paradox of Ukrainians being super patriotic but hating their country. But the craziest one of all is life in Ukraine at the moment, where it is absolutely insane and also completely normal at the same time. Because if you're in Kiev today, life is pretty normal. And this is the thing that people don't get. You see this a lot where Ukrainians will post on social media. They'll post a story of them walking down the street and life looks normal. Or you'll post a picture of them at the bar. Life looks normal. And people use this to justify the fact that the war doesn't exist. But if I've learned anything from the war, it's that life goes on. And humans can get used to absolutely anything. Because 90% of the time, unless you're on the front lines, if you're in Lviv or Kiev, life is normal. Businesses are open. People are living their lives. You know, I went to work every day. I went out drinking with buddies in the evening. On a Saturday, I would go to a cafe. I'd go to restaurants. I'd go meet my friends. Life is normal. You'd have no idea that the war is going on. If you know, there are things to look out for. You'll see a lot of windows that are covered with plastic wrap and tape, because if the windows get blown out, there's going to be less shards flying through the air. Or you'll see you'll see trenches that were dug at the beginning of the war. You'll see hedgehogs, those like anti-tank metal things that are just kind of laying about in random places at random thoroughfares. You'll see a lot of them off to the corner. And you'll see checkpoints. The checkpoints have been reduced a lot, but you'll sometimes get stopped on the edge of a city. But that was more 2022. You don't see too much of that these days. There is a curfew. You're not allowed to be out on the street from midnight to 5 in the morning. So you'll go out drinking in the center, and you'll see at around 11:30 people start rushing to get home, and everybody's trying to book an Uber, and the price goes through the fucking roof for an Uber. So everybody is either getting an Uber or they're getting on the scooters, the rental scooters, the electric ones. And you'll see like 3 people on a scooter just fucking zooming down the street because they all got to get home within 10 minutes before the curfew kicks in. But life is shockingly normal until the missiles come. And then, you know, you're hiding from the missiles. You're listening to explosions, wondering if the next one's going to kill you. But then after the missiles are done, you get a notification on your phone that everything is all clear. You go back out on the street. Everybody's living their lives. You know, cars going back and forth, people walking down the street. Old babushkas are selling flowers, and people are drinking coffee, and young people are making out. Like, life is normal. It's weird.
That's so bizarre.
Yeah.
And I mean, because you stayed until what, November of last year, November 24?
I had a weird back and forth. So I spent 6 months in Bulgaria, which was a really emotional decision. Like, I was back in Canada. I was there for about 2 weeks, and the war started. And I wanted to be as close to Canada, close to Ukraine as possible. And at the time, nobody knew how long the war was going to last. Was it going to be a month? Was it going to be a year? Nobody knew. So all I knew is that I wanted to be as close to Ukraine as possible. And I was extremely emotional. I called my boss in Ukraine and I asked if they knew anybody who wanted to hire a teacher, but I didn't want to sign a contract. I didn't want to commit to a year because I wanted to go back. And she said, well, hey, there's this school in Bulgaria. I know that they need a teacher, so give them a call. And I called this guy on Viber, and I still have it saved. It was a 4.5 minute phone call. And the guy said, yes, we need a teacher. I can give you $300 for a plane ticket. We want you immediately. And I didn't know my salary. I didn't know where I was going to live. I didn't know anything. I just booked a plane ticket and I just went. And ended up having a great time in Bulgaria. It was a wonderful place. So I was in Bulgaria for 6 months. I went back to Ukraine, but I went at a really rough time. I went in autumn of 2022, which was when they started hitting the electricity grid. So they started hitting the electricity grid. Electricity became very unreliable very fast, and it was getting cold and it was getting dark. And I had a very scary experience where at the time I was running 5 kilometers every day. I know, Charlie, you saw me in Toronto. I don't look like the kind of guy that runs 5 kilometers every day. But back then I was. And I had planned to go for a run that day. It was like October 13th or October 14th or something like that. And I was supposed to run to Shevchenko Park, big park in the center, right by Shevchenko University. It was exactly 2.5 kilometers from my apartment, so I would run there, run back. That's my 5K for the day. The night before, I had a sketchy shawarma, and it gave me food poisoning. It gave me an upset stomach, so I didn't go running that day. I woke up, and I didn't go running. And that was the first day that I was there, and we had a big missile attack. Because things had been relatively quiet in Kiev up to that point. But we had a big missile attack. And that was the first time I heard explosions. That was the first time, of countless times now, that my windows were shaking from the explosions. And Shevchenko Park got hit that day. There was a huge explosion in the park, or very near the park. And I did the math, and had I not gotten food poisoning, I would have been in that park and very near that explosion.
That gives you pause for thought.
Absolutely. And that was kind of the moment where I started to think to myself, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I need to be somewhere stable. Just for my own happiness. Like life in Bulgaria was good. I was already kind of nostalgic about my friends in Bulgaria and the life that I had kind of started to build there. So after I had also adopted a cat from the animal shelter. I was like, I need to get this cat to safety. So I decided, I'm going to move to Bulgaria. Like, I was really happy there. So I packed up all my shit. I moved to Bulgaria. And then 3 months later, had visa problems. Couldn't stay. Which was like a whole other story. So very suddenly I had to leave Bulgaria. And where did I go? I went to good old Blighty. Went off to England. And that's how I got this job. Is I ended up, because Bulgaria didn't work out, I panicked, and my friend in England, a former coworker, was like, well, I've got a spare bedroom, just come stay with me. I lived in England, and that's what led me to the job that I have recently acquired. Was my time there.
Man, that's a journey. I mean, it's a crazy thing, really, isn't it? Your life is...
It's been a whirlwind.
But your life is in a way, is still in Ukraine, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I miss it immensely. Like, I'm very nostalgic about it quite consistently. I miss the people that I know there. I miss life there. I miss... There's so many weird details of it that I miss. I miss Nova Poshta, the mail service. I miss the supermarkets, Silpo. Or I miss how fast things are there. Like, it's one of the weird positive things about the war. I hesitate to use that term, but for lack of a better term, the positive outcomes of the war is that the whole time I lived in Ukraine, Ukrainians didn't understand why I loved Ukraine. And the fact that Ukraine does a lot of things really well. But after the war, so many of them went abroad, and they realized, oh wait, this is shit, I'm going back to Ukraine. Like the medical system. Provided you have money to see a doctor, which in Ukraine it's very, very cheap, but you can get things done like that. Like here in Canada, my dad needed to get an MRI scan of his shoulder, and it was like an 8-month wait list, and he would have to pay $1,000 just to move that up. And he visited me in Ukraine actually during the war. He came for 3 months, and he was just hanging out with me, and he was telling me this story as we were sitting in Kiev. And I asked him what kind of MRI he needed, and I just put it into Google. I found a clinic about 150 meters from our apartment. I sent them an email, and they said, yeah, come on Tuesday. It'll be $50. Or I once complained to my landlord that the internet sucked and I wanted better internet. And from the time of me texting my landlord to getting new internet installed and working was 16 hours.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I have a friend in Belgium that moved to Ukraine moved from Ukraine to Belgium, and the process of her getting internet installed was like a 6-month process. That just never ending hassles. So
there's some things Ukraine does pretty well.
Yeah. They've got an app for all of your documents. Your driver's license, your COVID documents, your rental agreement. It's all on a single app called Dia, and it's just like you can have your passport on there. It doesn't work internationally because people don't recognize it, but it's like one app for all your documents. Ukraine is an incredibly digitized country. They have an amazing IT sector that has really popped off. They're one of the leading IT industries in the world. And they have a lot of kind of forward-thinking stuff going on in that section.
So how do you think this all ends?
Oh, fuck if I know, man. Nobody knows. I mean, it's been so long at this point. You know, I think everybody is still hoping that some random oligarch is going to just put a hole in Putin, and then they're going to walk everything back just to try and cover their own asses. I could see it. I could see a ceasefire standing where it is. But who knows? I mean, you know, the United States is kind of leveraging their position or backing out. And at the same time, you've got Europe getting a little more desperate. You start seeing things from England and France saying, oh, we'll send troops if we need to. So, who knows? Who knows? I've been speculating about it for 3 years, and I'm just, at this point, I just don't know.
Well, it seems clear that Trump is pretty keen to just capitulate and give in to Putin's demands without a fight. So, if I had to look in a crystal ball as a non-expert, I would say pretty much where the front line stands will be the settled peace, and Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO and will be under threat, and hopefully Russia has a leader one day that doesn't want to invade it.
I think the dream of getting back all of the territory is gone, if I had to say.
I think it's going to be very hard to get the Russians to give back the territory they've won when it's very clear that the most important country in the world is going to roll over. So it's a slightly bleak end to the podcast, but it was amazing to get an insight into what life is really like in Ukraine, because I think at times in the West people have been really engaged with it and then people forget about it. It's easy to forget that actually there are just a lot of people trying to live their lives there, and it was really interesting to hear about that. And it strengthens the resolve, but it's hard to know what to do about it.
People trying to live their lives is a good way to put it. It's funny because like the one last story I'll share is one of the reasons I wanted to be in Ukraine is every time I'm abroad, I have to explain myself. I have to explain what life is like. I mean, I'm doing it now voluntarily, and I want to, but it can be exhausting. But in Ukraine, everybody's in the same boat, where you wake up at 2 a.m. because the air raid alarm goes off. And I'll tell you this routine that everybody in Ukraine has gotten into. The air raid alarm goes off, and you hear it in the city, and you get a notification on your phone that something's coming at us. You check your phone, and it'll tell you what it is. There's 3 things that it could be. Either it's the MiG fighter jets, which are almost never a problem because that usually means that the front line is getting attacked. So at that point, you just go back to sleep. Or it's going to be the Shahed drones, which are the Syrian drones, which are lovingly called in Ukraine the flying lawnmowers. So if you see those, okay, you're probably going to be having some noise tonight. The scary ones are the Su-59 bombers. And if you see those, and if you see a lot of those, you know it's going to be a loud night. So what do? Well, first of all, you go back to sleep, because you know that those missiles are not going to be hitting for an hour, hour and a half. And that hour and a half of sleep is precious, because you got to fucking go to work tomorrow. So you go back to sleep, and you wake up with the explosion. So you'll hear the first explosion, and that's your time to get out of bed. Some people don't. Some people don't get out of bed. Some people just go back to sleep. They sleep through it. Or if you can't sleep, you can actually you can track the missiles on Telegram. And they'll say like, oh, the missiles are over this city. The missiles are over this city. And then you're cross-referencing it with Google Maps, and you're like, I have time to go get my charger. I can fill up my water bottle before I go hide in the bathroom. Nobody goes underground anymore. You can't go underground. So you grab your charger, you grab your iPhone, your phone, your laptop, you go sit in the bathroom because it's away from the windows. Because that's the big danger, is the windows getting blown out and you're going to get shredded by the glass. And you sit in your bathroom. Maybe you try and sleep. Some people have air mattresses, cushions. I never could. I would always, what I would do is I would jump on Discord and I would listen to my friends in Canada. They'd usually be online playing video games or watching movies. And I just sit there listening to them because it drowned out the sound of the explosions. And then, the explosions start hitting and you're listening to them and you're like, oh, that one was close. Oh, that one was really close. I could feel that one. And eventually it gets quiet. The sun starts getting up. And the government gives the green light and you go back to bed. Then you try and get a few hours sleep, you wake up, you go to work. That's life in Ukraine. And then you all go to work, and like I have my students, and it's like everybody's tired. Everybody's tired. And like we don't talk about it because we all know it. We like it's such a shared experience, nobody has to say anything. We all know that we're tired. We all know that no one slept last night. But we all get on. We all get on with it. We buy our coffee. We go to work. We see our friends. You live your life. There's just the occasional missile attack where people die. And the buildings that you walk past 1,000 times are now in rubble. But even though it's emotionally scarred, you get on with it. Go live your life. Which is, again, pretty bleak note to end the podcast on, but that's the best way I can summarize life in Ukraine these days.
Yeah. Kind of knew it wasn't going to be an optimistic episode. It just still blows my mind that this is happening in the continent that I come from.
Charlie, you and I talked about how this was going to go before we started recording past couple of days. I didn't think it was going to go this way, but
how did you think it was going to go?
I wanted to talk more about the things I love about Ukraine. I wanted to share just the quirky stories of just weird shit in Ukraine and just the fun things, the things I love about Ukraine. I'd still love to do that. Maybe if you guys will have me on for another episode, I'd love to like forget the politics, forget the war, just talk about the weirdness and the wonderfulness that is Ukraine outside of all this bullshit. Because there's a lot to tell. There's a lot of stories there.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll wait for Trump to capitulate, and when the new boundaries have been drawn and we know what the new Ukraine looks like, we should totally do that. No, it's clear that you love it. There's no doubt about that. It's great to hear.
It's such a shame because we get so focused on the war and Putin and people dying, but there's so many hilarious and wonderful and extraordinary things about that country that get kind of forgotten about. So I'd love the opportunity to talk more about that stuff.
Yeah. It's a shame. I mean, what was the old joke? Apart from the assassination, the Kennedys enjoyed the drive to the airport. I mean, it really, you can't talk about Ukraine, I guess, now without being realistic about the situation. But
yeah, it's the big elephant in the room.
It's amazing they've held out in the way that they have against a military power like that, and it's a kudos to them. It's a tribute to the Ukrainian people. But yeah, it's been really fascinating and pretty moving to hear about it. As I say, we got evacuated from our house in the fires, and the fire was coming down and burning our neighborhood, and so I don't compare that to being invaded, but I know what it's like to suddenly run from your house with basically what you can throw in your car and hope that your house is still there. I wouldn't say it's comparably challenging, but it's I still have a tiny insight what it's like to think everything I know might be gone tomorrow.
Yeah, it's not a competition. I think It's I've heard that where people are trying to empathize with the situation, but they feel that they can't really compare. But I think most Ukrainians just appreciate people paying attention. They appreciate when people still care. 3 years on, most people have forgotten about it. So, the fact that you guys were curious enough to invite me on, and, some of your listeners will hear this, and that's good enough for most Ukrainians. It's good enough for me. And life is hard. Life is hard for a lot of people, and just because you haven't lived through the war doesn't mean you don't know what it's like to lose something that you love.
No, it's very true, I think in today's world, a lot of people are kind of reluctant sometimes to express opinions, but...
Really?
I think
the problem is that people are far too open with expressing their useless bullshit opinions.
Maybe people are too willing to express the wrong opinions, whereas my correct opinions... No, I don't know. People are so afraid to tread on toes. I just hope Ukraine wins the war. I hope Putin dies, and I hope it hurts, and he's just a total piece of shit. And
one of the reasons I want to go back to Ukraine is that I want to be there the day that Putin dies, because that's going to be one of the greatest days on this planet. Is
That'll be great.
The day that that motherfucker dies.
The hangover the next day will probably have its own
night.
That'll be an incredible hangover. That'll get its own chapter in your book one day.
Absolutely.
What a treat to hear. I mean, I know it was a bit harrowing and dark and stuff, but it's just my life.
It's
fascinating.
It's so normal.
No, of course, but this is what people lose track of. You lose track of the fact that there's actually people there. So, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. And
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, let's do a happy one when it's at least been figured out a little bit.
Whenever you guys are available.
Well, the happy one will be on Edmonton.
I'm going to come with me and TT. We're going to come up to Edmonton. We're going to go to the mall.
Go to the mall.
Live from the
mall. Go to the 2 streets.
Yeah, we're going to...
Okay, even the mall...
Yeah, we'll interview some homeless people.
Absolutely. I've been watching... They got rid of the Mindbender roller coaster. Okay. They got rid of the fire-breathing dragon at the cinema. Why the fuck would you even go to the mall? There's no more flamingos. All the good parts of the mall are gone now.
Well, we'll go to an Oilers game. We'll watch Connor McDavid, who scored the winning goal against America last week.
Okay, that's the one thing we got going for us. Our hockey team's pretty fucking good. Although we just lost 2 in a row. Since McDavid scored the winning goal, and then we came back, and the Oilers have lost 2 in a row. So, go Edmonton.
All right, we're going to take this off air now, and me and TT are going to start looking at dates. Probably property. Might buy a place on Jasper Street. Yeah. But hey, thanks a lot. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheers.